Have you heard of the Wingfeather Saga by Andrew Peterson? The Wingfeather Saga is a newer middle school Christian fantasy series that I've heard a lot about, and a lot of people were telling me how good it was and asking me my thoughts on the series. And so I decided to dive in and read this series. And so for today, I'd like to share with you my thoughts and my review of it, and whether I'd recommend it for you or for your kids. So let's dive in. Overall, I think that this is a very good series. It's not my favorite, but I did enjoy it, and I did love entering into the world, meeting the characters, going on the crazy fantasy adventure. And it did feel like something that not only a middle schooler would enjoy, but an adult would enjoy as well. There is lots of action, there's lots of adventure, there's some great emotional depth, there's some great action scenes in this series, there's some good twists, great characters, and fantastic world building. So let's dive into the specifics of my spoiler-free review. In terms of negative, there were some issues with the plot, the pacing, and just the writing mechanics as a whole at the beginning of the series. Specifically in book one, there is some confusing point of view, writing mechanic issues, some poor characterization for some of our main characters, and some funky pacing going on. And yet, the thing is that every single issue I had with the first book is completely fixed by the last book. So, book one has a lot of issues related to pacing, character development, and character description. And I did have an issue with some of the big twists where it's okay, this was obvious. Everyone knew what was going to happen. To be fair, this is primarily written for middle schoolers, but at the same time, some of the big twists were very obvious. And then we get into book two, and much of the issues that I had with book one were completely resolved. The writing is much better, the pacing is much better. There was a very surprising twist that I was not expecting. I will say that book two was a little darker than I'd expect for a middle school fantasy novel. If your child is very sensitive, you might want to read the series first to make sure that it's not going to be too much for them. However, book two was much better in many, many respects. And then we get to book three, and book three is even better than book two. The writing is better, the pacing is better, the characters are better, there's some great action. There's still some issues I have with some of the twists involved and some of the setting up of storylines. However, overall, it was a really good book. And then we get into book four, and all the complaints I had are completely gone. Every single little issue that I had with the series, it's like, okay, well, this book is just blowing me away in every single one of those categories. The characterization, excellent. The action, incredible. The pacing is surprisingly really good considering there's a lot going on, and he splits up the book into three parts where we're following different storylines, and it's surprisingly done really well. One of my other complaints at the beginning was that one of the main characters didn't really have much going on in the first book and in the second book and even the third book, but by the fourth book, she is amazing and she's this incredible main character that is used really well. And so all of my complaints earlier from the series completely absolved by the end. And so if you're okay with sitting through some things that might not be your favorite in book one, just keep reading because by the end it turns out really good. But let's get into my favorite part of the series, and that being the world building. Now, it's funny because for me, I tend not to be a huge lover of world building. I think it's important, I think it's valuable, As a Christian fantasy author, I do enjoy doing the world building. And yet, some books that are very heavy on creating this really complex world end up being really light in the character development. You have this incredible world, but the story within the world isn't that interesting. This series not only does a good job of giving us good characters and keeping us invested in the story, but it has some incredible world building. You can tell that Andrew Peterson was having fun with it. He creates a ton of insane names for all of these different places and people, and it's so fun. He creates all of these various creatures and explains lots of details about the world that you would not think of. And so he ends up making it very engaging how he ties in all of this world building. One thing I love about it that I was very surprised by is that he adds citations at the bottom throughout the book where he gives more world building details, and a lot of them are really ridiculous or silly or fun. And I tend to not like that kind of thing because it can pull you out of the story. But those were all really enjoyable to read, honestly. I surprised myself with how I ended up making sure to read all of the citations at the bottom because they were so much fun to read. And so you could tell that Andrew Peterson loved creating all of these details for his world and all of this history, and he loved creating all of these ridiculous names for characters. You can tell that while, yes, there are dark and serious elements to this story, Andrew Peterson is having fun with it, and he invites the reader to also have fun with this series. And that's what I really love about it, that we are being invited into having fun and enjoying this world and enjoying these characters in this series. Some books take themselves way too seriously, and there's a benefit in those darker, gritty stories. But this has some dark elements, but keeps it relatively lighthearted and keeps things fun and interesting. And so if you were on the fence about checking out the Wingfeather Saga, I would recommend it. I think it's a fun read. It is not my number one series of all time, but it is fun. It is a good read. And as a writer, I love seeing the progression of him as a storyteller as time goes on. Because while there were some issues I had with book one, book two got better, book three got better, and book four was amazing. But I will say, as I mentioned before, if you have a more sensitive child and you want to have them check out this series, this is probably one that you want to read beforehand because there are some darker elements. I won't spoil anything, but it does get fairly intense, and there are some things that get almost horror-esque. And so I would highly recommend reading it beforehand if you have those sensitive kids. But either way, I highly recommend this series. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's an amazing world to enter, and it's an excellent addition to the Christian fantasy genre. If you read the series, please let me know in the comments what you thought of it. What was your favorite book? Who was your favorite character? Share with me your thoughts on the series because I would love to hear what you thought.